and what I usually like to do is we do have a speaker, but towards the end, what we can usually we turn off the recording during the discussion. So, all right. Well, we'll get started in a couple of minutes here. Nice to see some folks, additional folks joining. Don, hello, Don. Hello,
How
Victoria.
are you?
Good. Hi, Gavin. Gonna give it a couple more minutes. And then I will share a few things with you, and then I will introduce you to our speaker today. Hello to additional folks that have joined. Sybil, are you able to make me a co-host?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect. Awesome. All right. Okay. So we had a good number of folks register, and I see a lot of familiar faces. And we are trying to be more regular with these meetings, so having them every other month. And this really, again, I mean, started a few years ago as an opportunity for folks, mostly in Massachusetts, although we have folks from outside of Massachusetts join us, and we appreciate that and always welcome you to talk about well-being and improvements in the profession. As we know, many of you here are working on that. And so we usually try to have bring in a speaker to talk about a topic and then have some discussion. Last meeting it was mostly discussion based, which was fantastic. Hoping that folks make connections here, share resources, and sort of help everyone else out here. I know people are working on their own individual well-being and also working on workplace well-being and sort of well-being on a macro level in the profession as well. So we're always happy to have you here. And what I'm going to do is I just want to do a quick welcome and just a couple of messages, and then I will turn things over to our speaker today. So I just want to share my screen here. So this is our, I guess I call it the second meeting of the year, mainly sort of going off of the Bar Association calendars. So we had a meeting in September and meeting in December, and then we'll try to have another in let's see, February and April. And then of course there's Wellbeing Week in Law, which is in the first week in May, and there'll be lots and lots of events going on, and I'm sure many of you will be involved in those events. So just a couple of notes from the SJC Standing Committee, and I think at this point, I think most of you are familiar with the Massachusetts SJC Standing Committee, which was formed now 3 years ago as a result of the late Chief Justice Gantz and his interest in improving the profession. We do have a report that was published by a steering committee in 2019, which has really helped guide our efforts. And of course, we have adapted over time based on the sort of things happening in the world and changes in law practice. So we are we now we have a committee of 15 and 2 co-chairs, and I just want to first thank all the folks who applied to join the SJC Standing Committee. So there was a call for applications for this committee, because we do have terms, and there's folks that roll off the committee, and we're always happy to have new folks join. And so my understanding is that the SJC received many applications, which is very exciting, and I think says something about this this work and this movement, that so many people want to be a part of it. So if for some reason you have applied and you are not appointed by the justices, please do reach out, and we will find ways to engage you in this work, because the more of us that are involved, the more change will be possible. A couple of the things I wanted to share, some of the work that the committee has been doing as a result, again, of the 2019 task force or steering committee report, is we were looking for opportunities to help particularly folks who are doing work in public service with loan forgiveness. And just recently, we learned that a private attorney taking on CPCS cases full time had their loans forgiven. And this was a result of a lot of advocacy around changes to public service loan forgiveness. And now folks who do this work full time, they will be able to receive the benefits of public service loan forgiveness, just as staff for CPCS do. So this was big, exciting news. So I wanted to share that, and may have impacted folks here doing this work. We also we've been working for a while on mentorship, and we know the relationship of mentorship to well-being is very strong, and can certainly, strong mentors and those connections can really help, particularly newer attorneys and also attorneys in transition. And so we have been working over the past few years to create this mentorship program, and are continuing to expand this program. And so we do have a new program beginning in February, and I thank some of the folks here who are serving as mentors. If you're interested in serving as a mentor, please let me know. We would love to have you. We are now sort of transitioning this program to be much more structured with guidelines, with a required mentor training to provide mentors with all the resources that they need to be a successful mentor. And so this program will be opening soon. So please let us know if you're interested in volunteering and serving as a mentor. And then I wanted to let folks know that we're also in collaboration with lots of different groups hosting a law school, Massachusetts Law School Wellbeing Summit, April 26th, which will be sometime in the morning, probably from 8 to noon at Suffolk University Law School. And this is right now it is being developed by our legal education subcommittee, which has some folks who are here today and representatives from each of the 9 law schools, including administrators and faculty and students. And so there's going to be some really great programming. It will be open to the public. It will be free. It is really geared towards folks who are educators, so less towards students, although we'll have some student involvement, but really thinking about, how do we transform legal education to best support the well-being of law students and help them to develop into thriving attorneys. So that's going to be very exciting. So if you're interested in that, don't worry, we will send out information. And then I just wanted to remind folks that if you are interested in the demographics on our profession, this is sort of an ongoing project. This law practice demographic and law practice data, this interactive dashboard, which is always available through our website. It goes right to the researchers' site who are analyzing this and are providing this great dashboard where you can filter and sort and look at all the different demographics of the profession. So we're pretty excited about this. Jessica, did you want to ask a question?
I did, Heidi, and I'm sorry.
Feel free.
I didn't mean to interrupt the conversation here. I was curious in terms of how you solicited the demographic responses from respondents to get a robust response rate amongst the bar.
For demographics. It's now required. So
it was mandated. That was how you got there?
Yes.
Did you try anything in the interim in like a nice way to convince you, and did it fail?
Yes. It didn't fail, but the response rate wasn't great.
That's what I mean. Our response rate in trying to do this voluntarily hasn't been as high as we might have hoped. And so I was wondering if there was anything short of requirement that anyone had found to be successful.
So we did compromise a little bit. So it's part of all attorneys' ongoing registration requirements. They have to complete the survey. Every question does have a prefer not to answer option. So folks, that's the sort of compromise we struck. Anyone can feel free to always just click the prefer not to answer option.
And so what percentage, if you don't mind me asking, opt for that in the race category?
It was like 11-ish, I want to say.
Yeah, it wasn't very high, honestly. None of the prefer not to answers were that high.
Yeah.
I'm going to
So when it came down to it, when it came down to it, even though some people had took issue with it, it's a minority.
Oh yeah, it was definitely like at most 10 or 11% in the race category said prefer not to answer.
Our kids survive.
Laura, were you trying to say something?
That was strange. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to go back then and look at the way that I'll look at how things are worded, because maybe there's a language adjustment that would increase our substantive responses compared to prefer not to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to, we can always share the survey with you as well.
Yeah, and
that we use.
We did do some outreach, particularly encouraging people not to click the prefer not to answer option.
Oh, okay.
I don't recall exactly what we did, but I know we did that.
Yeah.
I think the bar associations, as part of the communication they sent out to everyone, it had a message saying we strongly encourage you not to click that.
Yeah, I think we still have that on our informational page and possibly on this. I think it might be on the survey itself that states that. So yeah, but happy to provide you with any additional information you need. All right. And then just a reminder too that we continue to update research reports, news, anything on well-being that we see that's relevant on well-being in law. You know, feel free if you have stuff that you see and you think we should post about, certainly let us know, as I know some of you do, and we're happy to post on that. But if there's anything that you're looking for, you need, you know, take a look at this page. We do try to keep it updated. And then the other thing is that I mentioned Wellbeing Week in Law, which is the beginning of May. We also have the Institute for Wellbeing in Law Conference, January 23 through 25th, which is a national conference. It's virtual, and there will be different tracks on individual well-being, workplace well-being, law school well-being, and well-being on the state and local level. And some of us will be participating in the panels on the well-being on the state and local level. So we would be delighted to see you there. And that, I think, wraps up my announcements as I wanted to introduce folks to our speaker today. So our speaker today is Katie Stanley. And I just want to note that Katie's website is, oh, hopefully I don't get this wrong, Being Kind Louder or Loudly? Being kinder,
louder. You had it.
Being kinder loud, being kind louder.
Yes.
Being kind louder. Yes. Which I feel like is the message that we need to, as lawyers to really internalize. We talked a lot about last month about communication and discourse and disagreement and sort of needing to have more compassion and being able to listen to each other. And so I love Katie's message. Katie is an attorney in Michigan and is a member of the Michigan Supreme Court State Task Force on Well-Being in Law, and they actually just put out a report, and she's also a member of Michigan's Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program, and also a member of the State Bar of Michigan's LGBTQ Council, among many other activities that she participates in. She's also a singer-songwriter, an advocate, among other things. And so I wanted to invite Katie here today to share some of what she's working on, and some messages she has, because I just think that there are things that we have spoken about that I think are going to resonate for folks here and will be of interest. So Katie, I'm going to pass things over to you. You know, people, please feel free to be interactive in the chat, you know, raise hands. Certainly we can have a discussion at the end and we'll stop the recording. But Katie, I'll hand things over now to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That might have been the warmest welcome I've ever received at a lap or a speaking event. I was laughing when you were talking because I was thinking, I never know really what to tell people in these things. Let me make sure how can you guys see that all right?
Yes.
Awesome. And I think I might be our first ever discipline board member with singer-songwriter on the on the bio. But
oh, I forgot that part too. You're on your state's discipline board as well, correct?
It's an irony, I'm sure, that as I was elected democratically class skipper in high school, many have wondered about in our adult years, but yes. So lots of different angles from which to view attorney well-being, but I'm excited to talk with you all today, particularly because I've spoken with law students, I've spoken with judges and lawyers, groups separately and together. I don't think I've ever presented this to a group that I didn't have to really, to use a pun, lay a foundation for them to get them to a place to be open to hearing it or even willing to think about things a little differently. So I'm going to share with you all some research that I've added in the last year to my dissertation. I'm about 2/3 of the way through that. And this is my subject area. So I've got about 150 pages of research, and it's always hard to pick kind of what you're going to share when it's a limited amount of time, but I hope that what I've chosen today is helpful for you all. So welcome. I always like to, in the introduction, thank you all for making the time to be here. A lot of what I share, it only makes sense in levels, the things that we do when we're not here. There are a lot of ways that we're of service and of counsel to people as attorneys. There are a lot of ways that we're of service outside of those roles, to our families and to our friends. And it isn't lost on me the expenditure of energy and time and dedication that it takes to care about making these things better in our communities. And I'm grateful, and I'll share a little bit of my story of how I ended up here, but Massachusetts, and I think I met Gavin, gosh, maybe 2 years ago. Yes, you all were some of the first states, I think, to do some of this work. So it really made it possible for people like us in Michigan, who I have to spend, half of my presentation giving a lot of research-backed, evidence-based kind of foundation for why we're even talking in the first place about lawyer well-being. So I'm really grateful. The things that you all do, although you may not see it, they make it possible for others like me to do this work elsewhere. And before we get into the presentation, I also like to take what's called a moment to arrive. So this is just a short exercise to transition from whatever or wherever we were doing things or what we were busy up to before this, to choose to be fully present here together now. Now, if you're driving, I was thinking about this. I think it was Eduardo that said he was driving. Please don't close your eyes. But if it's comfortable for you, I would invite you just to take a few moments with me before we start to find a comfortable place. If you're seated or standing, and either close your eyes or lower your gaze. And just start to bring attention to your breathing. Maybe taking a few deeper, slower breaths. Many of us are seated throughout the day and find ourselves having tension in our shoulders or necks. Maybe noticing and inviting some of that breathing into those places of tension, if it's comfortable for you, and allowing them to relax. Noticing the support of the chair beneath you or the ground beneath your feet. And just giving ourselves permission to quiet our minds from the busyness of the day and return to our breathing when our thoughts wander. And taking one final deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And to end this time and fully invite our presence here together, feel free to invite a little movement. If you've been seated, maybe stretch your hands. If you're standing, you can probably do a bit more. And thank you for sharing this practice with me. I do this before meetings, before difficult conversations that I have to have with clients or colleagues. It's something that's done, interestingly, I know, as Gavin will know, in a lot of corporate spaces as well, which we'll talk about more of why this research-based deep breathing helps us become more present and more effective in our roles. But it's as helpful to me, I hope, as it is to you. So I want to thank you for taking a moment to join me. So most of the research that I'm doing and how it contributes to larger change makes the most sense in levels. There's a Gandhian-based levels of social change lens, in which we start with ourselves, that then impacts our intergroups, and that then hopefully affects the systems of which we're a part. I've been gathering a lot of research around this subject area, specifically as it relates to mindfulness-based interventions in the law and the efficacy of those as they relate to breathing. So I share the journey ahead with you all here. We've got our prequel, I like to call it. I'm a big fan of puns and I try to keep things light. So I will tell jokes. There will be Legos, hedgehogs, Star Wars, and dad jokes along the way. But this is where we'll start. We'll start with the prequel because I want to normalize telling our stories. I am an attorney still by day, and I am in a lot of spaces where it is not normalized to tell our stories. So I'll share a bit of mine with you. We'll then move to, again, lay the foundation for why we should practice mindfulness at all and how it relates to what I'm talking to you about today. And this will lead us to what I like to refer to as the self-Socratic superpowers. I'm a philosophy major by trade before law school. So I was familiar with the Socratic method before then, but it's a whole different practice to practice it on yourself. This will also allow me to talk a little bit about compassion fatigue. I believed ahead of time that you all would be pretty familiar with this, and things like emotional intelligence and compassion fatigue and burnout, those are subject areas all on their own that I present on in standalone presentations, but we will spend a little bit of time on them today. We'll then move to making the case for mindfulness in the courts, which leads me to a section I like to refer to as recidivism and Yoda. And after which we'll tie all of these concepts together with my favorite part, using this umbrella of embodied social justice. We'll talk about what that means a little bit. And it's at this time I'll get to share some of my favorite research with you involving the phenomenon of what's referred to as pro-social contagion. And then we'll close by talking about, as I promised, false dilemmas, hedgehogs, and the sequel. If anyone can guess why hedgehogs are in this presentation ahead of time, I would be so happy to see it. And before I tell a little bit of my story to you, I want to repeat what Heidi said, because there's nothing I'm going to share with you all today that's more important than what you have to share. So at any time, let me know. I think Heidi, I'm sure I can assume, will help me if I miss something in the chat or if somebody raises their hand and I can't see everybody on my screen. Feel free to jump in anytime. I welcome it. So here is where I would normally talk about the task force reports, right? Because a lot of people still are in this space of, why are we even talking about lawyer well-being at all? I'm not sure if Massachusetts is a mandatory bar. We are in Michigan, so it's a different conversation altogether there. But I tell this story in the beginning to lead into how it related to me being able to pursue well-being myself. You know, I am, like Heidi said, I'm a musician. I didn't really plan on going to law school. My dad had lost his eyesight when I was young, and he chose as a second career in his 50s, as the first person in our family to go to college, to go to law school with accommodations. And what that meant is that I spent a lot of my formative years reading case law to him and driving to and from law school. And this experience of seeing not only what it looked like to have the license be you first. It was who he was with a law license, not the other way around. A lot of times I think when we get a license like a law license, we use that as an identifier or a qualifier for our value or our worth or who we are. And I got to see what it looked like when somebody used their license as the person they were, to really, as a ticket to make a difference in people's lives, to be of service. And Heidi mentioned that I'm on our LGBTQ council. I had been fired from my first job as, a 14 or 15-year-old kid for being queer back when that was lawful. And I'd watched my dad go through law school and these sorts of disabilities accommodations and the challenges of that. So I was really aware of how I might be able to use education as a ticket to be of service. So for me, when I went to law school, I was really happy to be there to hopefully help people. And I say that because it's important to note that even people who love what they're doing get burnt out. Sometimes there's this misbelief that if you're really passionate, as I am, and if you really care about what you do for a profession, that you don't need boundaries. And my experience was, when I graduated law school, I was really excited, right? But I'm also somebody, I'm neurodivergent. I'm the type to read the whole history of the Soviet Union in the middle of the night and think it's fun. So I have a whole different set of guidelines for what I think is reasonable. And I graduated law school, and in the month I was studying for the bar, however many years ago, I started a master's degree immediately. I was doing that, driving and commuting to do that. I was studying for the bar. I was working full time in my first job as an attorney, practicing under what we have in Michigan, a court rule that allows you to have clients and appear in court as long as you have a supervising attorney approving your work, essentially. Doing crime victim representation in cases of elder abuse. And very shortly later, my colleague went out on maternity leave, and I added to my elder abuse caseload a full caseload of domestic violence cases as well. So I was doing that in 14 counties. I am from Flint. If you all don't know, our office, one of them is in Flint. I've grown up playing music here, and at the time, the Flint water crisis was well underway. And I was doing part-time document review for an incredible attorney here in Michigan named Mary Chartier. And that was about 20 hours a week on top of my full-time job, the bar, the master's. I was recording an album because I'm a musician. That seemed like a good time. And I also got a puppy because when else am I going to be home this much? So as I lived on the third floor of my apartment in February, every about hour or so to potty train this dog, I had to, go down, I think it was 51 steps. I counted each way. And there came a day where all of these things were great for me. I love to learn. I felt like I was contributing. I was on lots of boards and committees. I was helping people. And because my time was so limited, I would often shop with my mom to spend time with her. We would each do our shopping alongside each other. And I lost this something like $9 bottle slip. And I had what I now know was a panic attack, my first one, in the grocery store. And I was raised by a very strong, kind of a Southern roots family. And my mom's right there with like a 20, trying to double my money to figure out how to get me to stop freaking out in the grocery store, essentially. And it was in that moment that I realized I wasn't making a lot of money in public service, but it wasn't about the money. And I needed to try something different if I wanted to keep doing the things that I cared about doing, if I wanted to be effective at doing it. I had had the experience earlier on of dating someone who was dyslexic and typing their papers. And it just so happened that in preparation for a social work master's, I had typed for this person a research paper on mindfulness, which I, of course, had no time for prior to this. But it was at this moment that I remembered what I had written, what I had read for this person that I typed their paper for. And I started a mindfulness practice. It wasn't shortly after that the Search Inside Yourself Institute, which was born at Google, they've done the first ever mindfulness training at the United Nations. They're a wonderful group of people if you ever want to have self-awareness based mindfulness training for your organization. They came to Flint to start and launch their first ever Mindful Cities initiative. So me and a bunch of other leaders from the public sector, the education sector, and government, we got together for 2 days. We did a training. I later became a fellow with that organization and got certified to teach it. And this all led to the task force, the appointment to the discipline board, doing work in all of these areas that I'm very confident in saying, I know that this is where I'm meant to be. I have a sense of that it's rewarding to me, and I'm glad to be here. But as I joked in the beginning, I don't think there's anybody who knew me before that ever would have thought I would be talking about this, because I'm neurodivergent, so I'm not great at sitting still. And I remember some of my first experiences with meditation and mindfulness were thinking I was really bad at it. I had had reconstructive jaw surgery. I couldn't breathe very well because of it. I had a hard time sitting still. And I share all of this with you partly, as I said, to normalize sharing our stories, normalize talking about panic attacks. I have a friend who's an incredible attorney who's actually today interviewing to be on our Circuit Court of Appeals that was having panic attacks. She realized when we talked about it because she was holding her breath. So talking about these things in and of itself has a lot of power. But also to say that I'm sure as many of you all are in this space of having kind of, I like to call it headlights at night. I can see the road in front of me enough to stay on it, but not quite what's around the corner. So where are these sorts of choices when you cultivate self-awareness? And I realized, like, for me, I started practicing in a different area of law. I started practicing fair housing, which was much more in line with what I'm passionate about. I changed the subject of my master's to the efficacy of employee well-being programs, and now I'm doing this dissertation on this subject. Self-awareness is sneaky, and it leads you in places you don't expect, because all of a sudden you're able to identify these places that it's kind of like knowing what your favorite color is. No one can tell you why, but you can just feel it. That's a hypothetical for what I believe self-awareness is like. And all of these choices have led me here to you today. And if this is something that you're open to or you're not already practicing, I would be the first to tell you that it will lead you to unexpected and wonderful places. So first, to quickly lay the foundation that we talked about, I won't spend a lot of time on these sections, but I I looked at the previous speakers you all had, and I know that you've had speakers on mindfulness before. For me, it was always important to the attorney in me to understand the research behind anything that I was going to try. And also to understand the words. As somebody, again, who's neurodivergent, understanding the words that I'm using and their intention and what they mean was really important to me. So when I talk about mindfulness today, I'm not talking about someone oming in Lululemon. I'm talking about this specific definition, which is very all-encompassing. The awareness that results from paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. And this mimics this definition, which is pulled from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's one of our most foremost scholarly researchers in the West on mindfulness and meditation efficacy. This echoes the National Report definition, which also emphasizes breathing. And the reason I do that in my research is because there are objective, documented physical benefits of slow, deep breathing. Apart from how you cognitively think about it, the reason why this works is because partly we have different neuroreceptors in the lower lobes of our lungs versus the upper, for instance. So when we are breathing fast and shallow all day, the upper lobes of our lungs have more sympathetic connectors that cause us to feel more anxious. And there's a really interesting growing body of research on the relationship between your quality of your breathing and how anxious you feel. We just in Michigan had Wim Hof come to Wayne State for the first time, and everybody, it seems like on social media, is jumping in an ice bath these days, right? And that's because they found when they studied him, he was able, using his breathing, to control what we previously thought were autonomic functions, meaning we didn't have conscious control over them, like his temperature. So the way that we breathe, despite how we think about it, has a physical or embodied effect on this experience that we're having together. And I listed some things at the bottom there, improved regulation, blood pressure, hormone levels. Some of the things that I've found interesting about, because I do this throughout the day, I write dedicated versus integrated here because you can go to the gym a certain number of times per week, like a dedicated practice. But with a breathing practice, it's something you can do in court or often. And when I'm breathing in the morning, when I'm brushing my teeth, I notice it's really fast and shallow. I start to get anxious about the day. I know things about myself about when I start to feel more anxious than other times. And just noticing how I'm breathing is a mindfulness practice that I can do anytime, anywhere. And some of the things about this that I've found more interesting than a lot of what I'm sure you've heard is that it can also impact our outlook. And this is partly because when we're in what's called allostatic overload, or we're feeling really stressed for too long, our body has the difficulty making what's needed, the neural connections needed for, one, empathy, and two, to be able to perspective take or have a different perspective. So when we're stressed for too long, our outlook can be more negative when we're able to find ways to remove our body from that experience or lower our nervous system response. That can actually help us perceive the world differently. And as somebody, as I said, who's a former philosophy major, I find that really interesting because there's a theory that your body is just the brain taxi, right? And if anyone's heard that, that's an actual saying, that our body just taxis our brain around. And we're starting to learn that that's not actually true, that this is all probably really common sense. If you think about how you feel maybe after you go for a run, when they call runner's high, how you feel when you eat foods that are more nourishing to your body. That's why these sorts of ideas, I think, is our way of finding language for things that we already know to be true in ways in our bodies. So these practices, as we talk today, they can be all those things. They can be mindful eating, where you start to notice the sensation of the food in your mouth and the nourishment of that, or the sensation of your feet on the ground, like we talked about earlier, or just the quality of your breathing, like my friend I mentioned. And some of the superpowers that you can cultivate, or that mindfulness and research has been shown to cultivate, is, as I said, EQ, which is extremely important, as Heidi alluded to, especially I've seen from a different lens adjudicating cases. Our discipline boards in Michigan have trial, appellate, and Supreme Court levels of review, and I'm at the appellate level of our discipline board. And we see, in a lot of cases, I think, people who are just struggling with these sorts of skills, that are maybe having things going on in their personal life, and then the things that make us good attorneys in some cases, the fact that we don't back down for our clients, that we stand up for people, don't help us in other cases learn how to step back and listen. So cultivating these skills, learning how to notice how you feel, like an emotional intelligence skill, starting to get curious non-judgmentally about what that might mean to you or how others might feel. And the Daniel Goleman has written about this extensively. The American Bar Association has an entire book on this called Smart Lawyering with Emotional Intelligence by Rhonda Muir. It's a wonderful book. And usually when I talk to firms about this, I talk a lot about like making more money and lower attrition and lower healthcare utilization and those sorts of things. But we can move past that with this group, I think. And a lot of when I talk about this, it seems to me like everybody's talking about mindfulness these days, but it's not really that new. Students at Yale and Columbia and Berkeley, contemplative lawyering has been taught in law school since the 90s. And actually Harvard had their first symposium, I believe, in 2010. So it's been decades that we've been talking about these sort of the benefits of being able to step back, to perspective take, to regulate our nervous systems, our emotions, our response to those around us, because they help us negotiate better. They help us mediate better. There's research that it helps reduce stress, increase our well-being. And for me, like I talked about, it also helped me be authentic, which then allowed me to have more authentic connections. There is a big distinction between feeling like we fit in somewhere, which I never really did, but belonging there as your authentic self. So I feel mostly, as to the best of my ability, like I show up as my authentic self where I go. And when I connect with people like Heidi or Gavin or people that I meet that are so warm and welcoming, I get this sort of connection from an authentic place of belonging, which there's a whole body of research about in and of itself. So this self-awareness, it helps us, mindfulness and self-awareness helps us make decisions about our careers. You know, I've had trial attorneys, really successful trial attorneys, in tears because they believe they have spent too much of their time at work and not enough with their family. And I'm always really interested to hear the top regrets of people who are at the end of their lives. Ever since I was a kid, I must have been a strange little person because I don't think this is a normal thing to think about when you're 5 or whatever. But I think I'm really grateful in the time that I've had here and whatever time I have left, that I've tried my best to really be present with the things that I think really matter, these sorts of bigger human questions that to me connect to our humanity and connect us to one another. And then lastly, this ability to practice boundary over limitations, as I call it. So my bottle slip moment, as I refer to it, is an example of my body keeping the score at the point at which I have passed my limit. Because truthfully, the whole idea behind embodied research is that both our mind and our bodies, they're sources of knowledge, right? Our bodies will tell us things sometimes. I'll know something. I'll know I'm feeling anxious before my mind even realizes it, or I'll know I'm feeling, some sort of intuition about a person or a situation. So getting more connected with what my own personal experience is and those sources of knowledge, they help me outline things I didn't have before that they call boundaries. And I'm in public service, so I always assumed that this was the most empathetic. That's how you continue to do that sort of work. And there was a study recently that looked at some of what you defer to. Gavin's nodding his head. It's really interesting. Our most empathetic people, so nuns and monks and these people that do acts of service full time. And I assumed what their common character trait would be empathy, and it was boundaries. This ability to say when you've reached them, to say what they are and articulate what they are, to know yourself so you can continue to do this work with others. And this is also these sorts of embodied, we talked about different types of knowledge. There's a myth that we only regulate our own nervous system to move out of the individual experience and into the interpersonal and this levels of change. We actually co-regulate. It's really interesting. They've studied this in new moms, for instance. They co-regulate the heart rate of their children. When you're in court, imagine yourself in court with someone who, when they walk in, you feel more at ease, or someone who walks in and you're immediately tense. This is kind of what co-regulation looks like. So how we carry our own nervous systems has an interpersonal impact on those around us. And then therefore, of course, our courtrooms, our colleagues, our firms, wherever you're coming from, which also impacts our ability to communicate effectively, to increase these things. I've done entire presentations on the importance of civility and all of the research across the country that's being done by different bars. Like Illinois has an incredible base of research on civility in the law and its impacts on professionalism and our rules of professional conduct and all of these things. Because they're related to how, one, our public trust in our institutions that help guide and guardrail the things that we do and why we do them, but also sort of our professional responsibility to one another. So when it's law students, it's a lot of professional responsibility. I feel like this is something that you all probably know better, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But what I will say is that the thing that surprised me is that they also found that it had an impact on mitigating what they call frontline trauma and incivility. So we're a frontline profession, I would say. People don't ever call us on a good day, right? They call us when they're going through some of the most difficult times of their life. And what they found in some of these studies with other similarly situated frontline service professions is that people that have a regular mindfulness practice are able to mitigate that incivility. I think for me, it allows me to separate the actions from others consciously from my own worth and my own actions. And that's, in a common sense way, what I suspect is happening. But it also has been shown to mitigate what's called moral distress. So this has only been looked at, to my knowledge, in healthcare workers, but essentially what this is the phenomenon of having to provide services with people inside of systems that don't allow you to do what you would consider to be the moral outcome. So I volunteered doing eviction moratorium cases during the pandemic, and I had cases where parents had passed away and the grandparents were now watching their grandchildren and at the same time getting chemotherapy treatment. This is a real case. And there was nothing I could do to stop them from being evicted ultimately. That's not, of course, the moral thing to do. And that, of course, caused me to feel a lot of what this is referred to as moral distress. When we move into talking about the why of, I'm always kind of like, why are we doing this at all? That's kind of where I'm always leaning towards. I'll talk more about how to reconcile with that. But just suffice at this time to know that these practices have been looked at in these professions and they support dealing with that. And I think that lawyers, we deal with something very similar in the work that we do, in the same way that a healthcare worker may not be able to provide what they've been trained to in service of someone's health because, say, they might not be insured or the like. And just really quickly, this is a tool that I like to use. When I talk about the self-Socratic method, this is just an example of some of the questions that we can ask ourselves. How fast are we going? Am I making space to reflect? These are the sorts of self-awareness prompts or journaling prompts that you can use if you don't have any examples, which I didn't in the beginning. And one of the most effective for me that I'll share is that to make a list of the things that are stressing me out, like that client, for instance, and cross out the things that I cannot control. Because what I realized a lot of my practice was I was expending a lot of energy on things that weren't mine to change. And it took a lot of energy from the things that I could, which interestingly turned into looking for small spaces and micro choices, things I could do that I did have control over, like hanging my neighbor's pumpkin sign on her front porch, that doesn't own a drill, or mowing I mowed like all our neighbors' lawns all summer. I really like to mow the lawn. So my lawn and my neighbor's lawn all summer long. That was something I could do in active service for others. And it really made a difference, I hope, for those people when I was asking myself what I could do rather than asking what I couldn't or focusing on what I couldn't. And that choice of what I'm going to reflect on was important. I used to come home every day and just watch lots of awful news channels, and I like to stay aware. There's a privilege in saying I'm not going to, I think. So I'm really conscious of that I'm not trying to close my eyes to what's happening in the world. But I have a friend, Sean, who always says, guard your gates. He means your eyes, your eyes, your ears. Guard your gates. Think about and be conscious of what you do have control over, the small choices you do have. And then what kind of messages we're giving ourselves. That was a big mindfulness practice for me. Was, like I said in the beginning, I was really harsh, and I find a lot of attorneys are, on myself. Most of my thoughts were like really self-critical. And what I found months into my practice of responding to those thoughts consciously and truthfully not believing them, but understanding that neuroplasticity was real, so doing it anyway, that there came a moment where I didn't think so harshly about myself. And it was almost like I'd won something nobody knew I was competing for, because one day I was just really excited that I was thinking differently. And it was evidence that these practices were actually changing how I thought and believed. And we have all these sort of individual benefits, and we talk about interpersonal benefits in the courtroom. This is related to also how our judges act. And like I said, I won't talk a lot about this, but for attorneys, if you're practicing, or even, I don't know, if you're someone that works in service, there's something called correlation bias, where if you see something enough, you start to anticipate or have a bias from experience that the things that you've seen will be like the things that you will see. This is something that I see in attorneys a lot, and it's something that mindfulness has helped me with. So we do a high volume of cases in Michigan. In our civil service, like I said, we cover 14 counties. And imagining this, if you are somebody who sees 200 cases a day, if there's even a chance that practicing these, being consciously aware, is going to help you be more present and be more intentional with these engagements or interactions that you have with people, I think it's important to have an openness to practice them or try. And also for the reason of increasing trust. We can't separate the people in our institutions from public trust in them, because our institutions are made up of people. There are no wholes that aren't made up of their parts in the law. There's not going to be an AI of the judiciary. So the way we are as people, it matters. And also because of this difference between, I kind of described it, but this difference between guilt and shame, because we have a phenomenon in practicing that increases our self-compassion. And increased self-compassion has been linked to reducing shame. I did a training for the state's public defenders here in Michigan, and this was huge for them because this is applicable both to victims where their level of shame has been in a significant amount of studies. Your level of shame in victims has been linked to the severity of their experience of post-traumatic stress, the severity that they feel them in their bodies. And also in people that commit violent acts, this is also the experience of shame is also huge. And what research is beginning to quantify is that when we differentiate between guilt as the act being bad, as opposed to shame or the self being bad. So using language, I think I used to use some of this language in my own thoughts about myself, but that just encapsulates you as a person instead of somebody who's imperfect and trying to do things as best you can. This is really hard in some criminal justice settings. Given the work that I've done, it's not always entirely possible, but it is possible to be conscious of it because there is a larger image at mind that we would hope that these sorts of practices would lower recidivism and create a more equitable system for us all. I won't do this with you. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but this is one I use often just so you have it in case you haven't. It's called box breathing and it was created by Navy SEALs. So I use this one often when I'm with folks that have been police officers or the like. And it's just a practice you can do in which you inhale for 4 and hold for 4 and exhale for 4 and hold for 4. And I do this a lot. I do it with our kids when I'm trying to create a mindful space, so much so that I'll warn you, people will catch you doing it, but this is a great practice to have. So now in our last couple minutes together, we've talked about individual change, talked about some of the intergroup benefits of when we show up more mindfully. How does this have to do with systems? So the premise of levels of positive change is that we start with ourselves, then imagine all these roles that we as individuals occupy, how many lives they affect interpersonally. And then these things cascade what's called into pro-social contagion. So when we are happy, there was a 20-year controlled study at Princeton, I believe, but these things have been studied at Harvard and the Happiness Lab, who I know is coming to be our keynote speaker in January, that when we're happy, it extends what's called 3 degrees of separation. So this is even if, say, you don't ever meet this third person, it's been quantified that your impact on the first person will possibly lead them to have an impact on that next person. So the message of this for me that is encouraging is that I can make these choices that impact the people that are in front of me to the best of my ability. And it's likely that there's an impact I'm never going to see. And that is a part of these levels of social change, that when we are happy or we act more civil or kind to one another, that there will be a social cascading to this. And some of the research is really interesting. Some of it even includes people that are really difficult to find empathy for, like people who have committed murder, so on and so forth. They've also compared this to what's referred to as the incivility bug to see if civility or incivility are more contagious, which I assumed would be the converse, but what they found is that civility and kindness are actually more contagious in social groups than incivility or the incivility bug. So sometimes in well-being, they say well-being is one of the most commodified areas now in America. And I think when I first was exposed to well-being, I thought, great, here's another thing I am not going to do well or enough of. And we're presented, I think, in a lot of spaces, what's referred to as these false dilemmas. Like I can either be well or I can be of service. I can either be kind or I have to protect myself and be guarded. These sorts of false dilemmas that are really actually more nuanced in reality are presented. I'm sure all of you could think of a million examples in our modern world where things are presented as either or black and white, when really there's so much more nuance to the conversation. And the truth about well-being, especially for lawyers, is that it's not just an individual issue. We know that as humans, we need connection, We need community care. We need spaces like this where we can normalize talking about our experience. So maybe Gavin can help me identify something that I've not been able to see, or so on and so forth. We need this to help heal ourselves and one another in order to hope to heal these systems of which we're a part. And because we need this connection, there's this famous metaphor called the hedgehog's dilemma that Schopenhauer uses, that hedgehogs need to stay together in the winter to stay warm, but because their spines are so sharp, they end up poking one another. So this idea that, yes, we need one another and we need connection, but we probably are going to poke one another along the way. There's no amount of individual well-being that is fully going to, I hate to break it to myself and everyone, but no amount of nutrition or running or meditating that's fully going to alleviate the trauma of dealing with some of these cases or systems that are broken, human suffering. But my invitation to you is to practice being kind louder, both to yourself and others, knowing that there's an impact that you might never see, and reframe what you perceive as resistance to the immorality or injustice that you perceive that feels out of your control. There is what Sartre calls a radical freedom to making choices in the face of a world that presents many of the answers already for you, that we can choose in these small micro moments. In a hypothetical way, I heard someone say, what is the internet? If you built the most incredible website that could be built, but nobody clicked on it, it would be as though a tree fell in the woods. All across the world are people making small micro choices about what they'll purchase, what they'll do with their day, how they'll speak to people, what they'll engage with in the world. And those micro choices are much more consequential, I believe, than we've previously acknowledged or allowed ourselves to talk about. So embodied social justice, this idea that we're having a both and experience, places these sorts of everyday activities at the center of transformational change. Small acts of kindness, responding mindfully, these things can be contagious. So even when it feels like we keep getting poked by the world around us, during the dead of winter, when all we want is somebody to be close and some warmth, we can still choose to embody these principles. And that in and of itself, I believe, is an act of freedom, an act of resistance. That is how to have hope when we don't feel hopeful, to be kind in the face of unkindness. This is something that I believe is an act in a way of protest in an unkind world. And I don't mean this in any sort of way other than what I say it, just that we come into the world and it's hard on everybody. And the ability to make these choices I could list 20 existential philosophers who talk about the same thing. And what they all say is essentially this ability to choose what we'll do with our own time and energy. That is embodiment of freedom in and of itself. And now we know from research, it's also contagious. So for those of you that were born or grew up in the 90s, I can't believe I forgot about this movie. But this is a movie called Pay It Forward, and I'm in like I said, the end of my dissertation, and we watched it the other day because I saw a clip on TikTok, and this middle school sociology student decides to do 3 acts of kindness, and then they have to do 3 big acts of kindness for 3 more people. And just to spoil the movie for you, which is really sad, by the way, he comes to a point where he doesn't believe he's making any impact at all. He thinks the project has completely failed. I think this is a perfect representation of what I'm trying to share with you, is that there will come points where we aren't able to see the impact of the good work that we're doing. And it's my hope that knowing some of this research and having some of these spaces like we have together today, that maybe you'll be able to take a few deep breaths and keep going anyway. And I put my contact information there. I know that we're a few minutes over, but I'm happy to take questions or talk about it a little more. And I'm really grateful to have spent some time with you all today.
Katie, thank you so much. I feel like there were so many amazing sort of nuggets of wisdom that we can take with us. I really love how you closed too, because I think a lot of us who are doing this work, we don't see the progress overnight, and that can be a bit frustrating. Um, and so I appreciate those words. And I will also say that Katie definitely practices what she preaches. After
Mm.
we, the first time we spoke, she sent me probably one of the nicest, most authentic notes I have ever received. And so I really appreciate that, and I think that it goes a long ways, and especially in this profession. So I just want to open it up to folks here, to anyone who would like to comment or questions, anything that resonated with you that you want to chat about before we wrap up.
Wow, and I'm just reading through the chat. I couldn't see it at the same time. This is, oh, thank you all. Oh, I think,
Lyle,
is
go
it,
ahead. Yeah,
yeah, Lyle.
It's Lyle. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm Lyle Baker. I'm a law professor here, but most of the folks here are not legal educators. But I just would ask if you had a thought or two about what you would do if you ran the zoo, as we used to say to Dr. Seuss, in law school.
Mm.
Well, I actually just did a guest lecture, a 2.5 hour long lecture on a lot of these subjects at Wayne Law. And I think what I would say is that I am trying to have faith as much as I can in others as I do. I have to work at it to have faith in myself. And creating these spaces where we really do listen to each other and normalize talking about these things, it's much more powerful than I think we realize in the moment. I often get feedback from people. When I do in-person trainings, like, I bring a box of fidget toys, which is hilarious when it's a bunch of judges. Everybody likes them. At first, they won't admit it, but I'd say that story to say that after that training at the law school, a particular law school, a student reached out to me and said that she had visual hallucinations as a symptom of her schizophrenia, and that fidget toys helped her pay attention in class and not focus on those visual hallucinations. So me bringing my fidget toys and being my strange neurodivergent self in that setting made it normal for her to use an accommodation that was helpful to her that she was previously too embarrassed to ask for. So I say that story to say that I share all of this information with hopes that people take it and it nourishes their hearts and their souls in a way that leads them down a direction that they need to go down. And I think that's really all you can do, I think, is sharing what you know and what you can and what you think will be helpful, and then accepting you can't control what you can't control. But I get so many of those stories after I share presentations like this that a lot of times it's my story. It's a kid that has ADHD that didn't think they could be a lawyer, or somebody with a disability that needs an accommodation, like my dad, who doesn't want to ask for it. My dad is 92% blind and did not want to ask for more time to take the bar exam. So what does that culture tell us? I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, I think there's a lot of power in that, and showing up and being authentic with people, because it creates the space for them to do the same.
Well,
Gavin does this really beautifully.
You've also inspired me to go find a fidget toy. If you have one, I'd love to know what it is.
Lyle, I will send you a whole list of my top 10 favorites.
All right. That's great. Thank you.
Inez is laughing at our fidget toys. Bruce, yeah.
So Katie, I just wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. Throughout the whole presentation, I've had tears in my eyes because I mean, you hit upon, you know, what I've gone through for the last 30 years in my own practice, and you've given me and all the other people, and I will share that with as many people as I can. You've given us sort of a roadmap as to, you know, how we can deal with some of our anxiety and depression and being so hard on ourselves, because as lawyers, we are hard on ourselves. We want to win at any cost. We work so hard, and you know, I keep on my computer screen the 4 agreements, and the hardest one for me is don't take anything personally. And so I guess, you know, just a lot of what you said resonated with me, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Bruce. I try to keep reminders too. And sometimes, oh, see, and Gavin left a resource down there for people who are, yes, that's a good answer. Dr. Kristen Neff's work. Sometimes I was talking to that colleague I mentioned earlier that's interviewing today to be a circuit court judge. She met with me yesterday, and I was thinking, oh, I know all of this philosophy of law, and I can tell you all these interesting answers you could say about your judicial philosophy and all. And do you know what was the most helpful to her is that I'm kind of a mixture of things. I'm very spiritual. I grew up in those spaces, so I really identify with that. And I know it's one of our pillars of well-being at the national task force level, but it's really helpful to me. And something that has helped me tremendously is somebody who gets anxious no matter what I'm doing, whether it's something I'm excited about or not, is accepting that this is going to always probably be a part of my experience. And then taking time to get quiet with that and ask myself to get out of the way so I can show up for whatever it is that's bigger than me that I'm trying to contribute to, whether it's music, and whether it's a client, whether it's this movement that we're all a part of together. Oftentimes when we're in that space of questioning ourselves or feeling so anxious or out of control, I notice that it inhibits me from showing up, it puts me directly in the way of the very thing that I'm trying to do. So sometimes I find it just helps to say, yep, this is how I'm going to feel. I will be nervous. I will feel better once it's over. I will need 2 to 3 business days to recover, and then I will be back. So not always trying to put pressure on ourselves to feel different immediately. That was the thing that I really took people at face value, that if I just ate right, ran enough, and did enough meditations, that I would just feel instantly better. No. I think the younger generation is really good at calling us to the carpet on that one. They're like, no, guys, what you're selling me, I'm not buying it here.
Yeah, Katie, I was actually just going to bring up the younger generation and the added sort of differing perspective they are bringing to the legal workforce, the legal community, and how they very much are. They'll ask for accommodations in a heartbeat in a lot of respects. They are talking openly about these issues far more frequently than many more senior folks in the profession are even comfortable with. And really sort of recognizing how what I try to help the more senior folks who are struggling with that, what I try to help them recognize is that what the junior folks are doing is trying to improve things for all of us, and what we can learn from them. And rather than resist the change that they're bringing, trying to help learn that the lessons that they have learned growing up in a very different culture than the one many of us grew up in.
Yes, and I've heard it put, I'm a firm believer that, like, I believe Heidi said this in the beginning. God, I wrote it down that we're more effective. I think you said the more of us are involved, the more change is possible. It's a walking alongside one another. And I heard it put that more traditionally minded people are grieving the loss of something that was, while people that are coming along and trying to make changes are also grieving. They're grieving something that isn't or hasn't been yet. So on both sides of this issue, there's a sense of grieving something that isn't. And we need both, right? I'm the type that I've made legal comic books and apps and all this stuff. I will get in an airplane, not an airplane, this is a bad hypo because I hate flying, but in a hypo sense, I would get in an airplane before I knew it could fly. I need somebody who's more grounded and who will give me the steps to get there. I need both sides of that conversation. And I think rather than it's another one of these false dilemmas that it's either or, which isn't true. It's the lazy, easy way out is to say it's either or. The more accurate and difficult, consequently, route is that we need each other, that there's a way forward, that we can't use the tools of before to tear down that house into something new, that there's a saying that we need each other, creating more of an invitation that's welcoming to everybody. I think that's a very profound action in and of itself. And it's it's really hard to do. I occupy all these different spaces where sometimes I'm too queer, sometimes I'm too spiritual, sometimes I'm, you know, what it's like I never can land on the right mark. Which I think is part of what's pushed me into authenticity. I was really truthfully nervous about today because I usually share a lot more research, and I wanted to share more of what the message behind it for me is today. And I thought, well, I have space here to be a little more authentic. And I wouldn't be honest about what I'm doing if I didn't try once I became aware, or as Maya Angelou says, you know, do better once I know better. But we have to find ways to reconcile with forgiveness. Right? There's some languages, the word for forgiveness is the same as freedom. That when we forgive, we then free ourselves. And I love that because it's really hard, especially when you do any sort of criminal work, to do that. Or when you're really passionate on either side of an issue. For me, it's harder probably to land anywhere. This is a great conversation. I love this. I wish I could talk to you guys all day. Now I'm gonna have to remember to send Lyle a list of fidget toys.
I just sent you an email so you'd have it. You can.
Perfect. You know, the first time I was exposed to that was train the trainer type of thing, where they train the trainers to train judges, and they told us that judges don't have very long attention spans and they like gifts. And I thought, I love these. I have to get more of these things. And I don't know if I got to find that guy and tell him I'm spreading his fidget toy phenomenon across the land. It looks like lots of resources too in the chat. I hope I can find a way to download this before we close today, because I would love to see all these resources.
Heidi just informed me that unfortunately it sounds like her computer crashed. So she has authorized me to close the meeting. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Katie, I cannot possibly express in words how grateful we all are for your thought, your research, your openness, your kindness, your authenticity. This is a presentation that I think will be thought about and remembered for a very long time. So thank you so much for being with us today. We're so grateful for you. Thank you everyone else who came and shared and participated. And you know where to reach us, you know where to find us, and we look forward to each of you getting as involved as you want to be in this work. Bye, folks.
Thank you all.